All right, great. We're all ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Virtual Learning Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Meg Foley, the Coordinator of Virtual Learning at the Department of Education, and co-hosting the meeting with me today is Mr. Reginald Fox, and Reggie will be introducing himself shortly. First of all, we want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Today's educational climate has introduced an increasingly robust focus on virtual learning. And it's therefore just imperative that we dive deeply into virtual learning best practices, approaches, and strategies to ensure that quality and equity are at the foundation of our procedures and our practices. So let's take a look at today's agenda. Right now, we're in the beginning of our welcome. Next, we'll be having some introductions. We will have some opening remarks. Then we're going to have some history, a little bit about the committee purpose, the role, the term, and everything. Then we're going to have a little bit of a brief historical framework for draft recommendations. And then we're going to break off into some subgroup presentations. We have 3 subgroups that will be sharing their work to date today. We're going to talk a little bit about the timeline that we have proposed for our next steps and where we're heading with the virtual learning regulations work. So again, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I want to turn over the presentation to Reggie for our protocols and our attendee introductions. Thanks, Reggie.
Thank you so much, Meg, and I echo Meg's welcome. Thank you all for being here with us today. I'm sure that with the time that we've spent online, we're familiar with the online format of Zoom. And just while we're speaking, we want to unmute ourselves. And if we're not speaking, just mute. If you want to use the raised hand feature, you may do so during the meeting. And we will have chat live. We are live streaming and recording this session. So we welcome your input in the chat area as well as spoken. And the YouTube channel and the mailbox will be open until October 8th so that we can facilitate any comments from the public. And so we have a variety of people here today representing different areas of education and administration, and we want to do this in the most efficient way, but we do want to recognize you that are attending the meeting. So if we can, we will just, you are able to unmute yourselves, so we will just go down the list of folks who are here, and if you will just give your name and position, we'd appreciate that.
Hey, I'm James Lane, State Superintendent.
Michael Bowling, Assistant Superintendent for Learning.
Hi, all. I'm Dr. Leslie Sale. I am the Director of the Office of Policy with the department.
Hi, I'm Jim Chapman. I'm the Regulatory and Legal Coordinator.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brendan Albon. I am the Director of STEM and Innovation at the Department of Education.
I think we can skip me again, Dr. Meg Foley, Coordinator of Virtual Learning.
And on to we have division superintendents represented from each region.
Good afternoon. I'm Ernie Longworth, Director of Instructional Innovation. I'm representing Dr. Daugherty from Chesterfield County Public Schools.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Monroe. I'm the Assistant Superintendent here in Caroline County Public Schools. And today I have with me Mrs. Margaret Bryan, who is our Coordinator of Virtual Learning and Innovation here in Caroline County.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to join you with learning about this virtual learning initiative.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Lundquist, Region 5, Stanton City Schools, in for and with Dr. Smith.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Osborne. I'm in the place of Mr. Robbie Mason from Charlotte County Public Schools.
All right.
Good afternoon. I'm Rodney Jordan, the past president of the Virginia School Boards Association.
Good afternoon. I'm Ben Kaiser, the executive director for the Virginia Association of School Superintendents.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mitzi Felseward. I'm the Vice President of Digital Learning here at WHRO, and Bert is not in attendance today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian. I'm the Executive Director of Virtual Virginia.
So we have the makeup of all of our work group members here, and we've introduced our folks from the VDOE. We have other work group members here. So we'll start with Dr. Mangwitman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tina Mangwitman. I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Newport News Public Schools.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ashley Ellis, Deputy Superintendent in Loudoun County Public Schools.
Team, I went out of order, but I'm Herb Monroe. Thank you.
Susan, I think you're on.
Hi, Susan Patrick, the President and CEO for Aurora Institute. I'm here on behalf of Fred and I. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and go, Reggie. I'm Christine Bali. I'm the Regional Sales Director with Edgenuity.
And I'll jump in. I'm Carolyn Sikora from ISTE, and I'm the Senior Director of ISTE Standards, and taking the place of Jisoo Song, who participated last year. Really glad to be here.
Karen Richardson, Executive Director of the Virginia Society for Technology in Education.
All right, did we miss anyone? All right, thank you so much. We'd like to introduce our State Superintendent, Dr. Lane. Thank you.
Thanks, Reggie. Just checking tech here. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, I'm excited to be with you. I can't stay the entire meeting, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work I think you're going to begin taking on today. And in advance of that, just say a thank you for being a part of this work. We've obviously entered an environment where virtual learning was at first necessary due to the pandemic, and at some points it was optional, and now I think it's becoming a permanent fixture in what we do. Obviously, much of the focus we're going to ask you to take on is not in what I really want you to be focused on, which would be the deeper learning and blended learning atmosphere that ultimately is the goal for our classrooms throughout the Commonwealth. But the board is asking VLAC, starting with today's meeting, to take a deep dive into what are the standards that should govern virtual programs in Virginia. And I think that we did what we had to do to make all of that work throughout the pandemic, and we had a lot of regulatory and legal flexibility to do so. But moving forward from here, I believe we've entered an environment where 1 to 5% of our students, depending on where they live, are going to choose a full-time virtual experience. Maybe they were a middle school student that was getting bullied. Maybe they have a medical disability that requires them to be away from the school building. Maybe they'll go part-time virtual where they take their core classes and maybe other classes online, or vice versa. And so with this new reality that is going to be the much more flexible virtual space, whereas we know that in-person learning and blended learning and deeper learning are the best strategies for the most students, we've got to make sure that we've created standards for those kids that choose to stay at home, especially those that choose to stay home 100% of the time, to make sure they're getting the best education possible in the virtual setting. So I won't go into too much of what I think should be in those standards. I want you to really critically look at this. There's a lot that will go into this in terms of what our multi-division online providers will provide based on those standards. What is the appropriate class size or maybe student load that a virtual teacher should have to ensure that they can provide a quality experience? What are the best resources, or how might we govern curriculum like we would in an in-person setting? How much of the time should students expect to be engaged with their teacher directly? Of course, you know that the 180, 990 hour clock hour rule is about teaching hours. It's often referred to as instructional hours, but the code actually says teaching hours. And so how much teaching should a full-time virtual student expect in a high quality program? There are a million more questions I think we'll ask and answer over the coming months, but I wanted to give you a sense of the challenge and how big the policy issue is that you're going to tackle, because we'll be one of the first states to really lay down a marker for what we expect in terms of quality. Now, many of you are innovators, and I know you well, and your initial reaction is going to be to say, let's not put too many regulations because that will keep innovation from happening. But I will tell you, for every, and I see Ashley smiling, for every Loudon that's out there, there are 5 school divisions that are going to need guidance and need regulation to make sure that we actually can be sure that students have great experiences. And so the other big challenge that you're going to have is balancing opening doors for innovation while ensuring quality through regulation. And I really appreciate that you're going to tackle that project. It's rare that I get on a call and I feel like I know everyone on the call. So this is actually pretty cool. We have a great team prepared to lead this work. You've got national experts. You've got some of the best local experts I've ever worked with. Ernie, I'm looking at you. And I look forward to hearing what you produce. So thank you all so much for being with us. And if you need anything from the department as you navigate this really big policy question, not only for the Commonwealth, but for the nation, we're here to support you with any resources that you need. So Reggie, Meg, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lane, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And we appreciate your leadership and remarks to challenge us as we do the work of this committee. We do want to recognize Cynthia Evans, who is also our support admin here with us today. And I believe that Bernard Davis, would you like to introduce yourself? One of ours, I thought I saw him.
Yep. Bernard Davis. Some of you guys may know me as Trey Davis, Richardson County Public Schools in Eastern Virginia.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
Won't stay where it needs to be.
All right. We'll introduce our Assistant Superintendent, Michael Bowling, to continue with the meeting here.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Lane, thank you for your comments. And many thanks to all of you all for taking the time to serve on this important advisory committee. And the advisory committee, this group is kind of oversees and provides recommendations and advice in the areas of online courses, in-service training, and digital instructional resources, that are necessary for schools, as well as strategic planning on where we need to go with Virginia. But I think we do have our course set out for us right now. And today we have one big topic to talk about, the work group that's been deep in work over the past few months and coming up with some recommendations. And so today I'm going to set a little background as to how we got here, but Dr. Lane really talked about it, and I think we all know and don't have to repeat the impact of COVID-19, but the expansion and really the focus on virtual learning throughout the Commonwealth, it has really increased. And as Dr. Lane said, it was required, then it was optional, and now it's just a part of what we do every day. But it is certainly still evolving. And this includes the development of virtual programs that are happening throughout the Commonwealth, and eventually the development of actual schools. Like virtual schools. So I want to go back to 2013 when there was actually proposed regulations for accrediting public schools in Virginia that addressed virtual schools. And that was a law that went into effect, and efforts were started. And there was actually a proposal in 2013 from which we started our discussions and really gained a lot of insight as to what was happening at that time. And then we applied that knowledge and worked with it in the context of the needs of today. In June, we opened up a NORA on virtual education regulations. And so the board approved that NORA, which moved us into the proposed stage of the regulatory process. And it was posted in Town Hall for comments. From then, we developed a work group that broke into a few groups, and Dr. Albin will next be talking about what comprised those groups, or what those groups focused in on. But some of the focus areas, Reggie, if you go to the next slide, some of the supporting documents that we used in order to build our knowledge and to also learn from were the original proposed regulations, the standards of quality, of course, the standards of accreditation, and then also research from ECS as well as the Aurora Institutes. And then additionally, we reviewed a lot of information from other states and their approaches to virtual learning and regulations that applied. And so we got ideas from a lot of different places, and then the work groups met to really make specific recommendations. What you're going to hear today are a list of recommendations that fall into three buckets that Dr. Albin will describe. But I want you to know that when you're hearing these recommendations, some of them, they will end up falling into potentially different buckets. So some may fall into a regulatory bucket, meaning they will turn into a all schools shall type statement that is through the standards of accreditation. Some may fall into recommendations for standards of quality and for staffing standards, and some may fall into different other areas. And that's one of the reasons why we have Jim Chapman here on the call to help us kind of sift through this. The committee's recommendations said, hey, what are all the things that we need to provide guidance and support on for school divisions as they move forward? And then it's our policy department. We'll work with Emily Webb and the liaison to the board and others to kind of craft that into what becomes our regulations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Albin, and he will talk about the different work groups.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bowling. So a couple of things there. As was mentioned just a few slides back, a lot of research was done into what already does exist. If we are to propose new regulations that are going to determine how virtual learning is going to operate in public school in Virginia, then it would help us to take a look at that which has already been done in other places, as well as the 2012 proposed regulations. So what happened was we took a look at all of the issues that we felt that might be unique or might need to be differentiated out of virtual, out of brick and mortar classroom that might become unique in the virtual learning setting. And a lot of it more or less fell into these three buckets. And the first And in a moment, we're going to have team members from subgroups of the greater committee who worked on each of these to propose recommendations. And these recommendations are not policy or anything specific yet. These are things that those committees said based on the research, based on our knowledge of what has happened the past 2 years, and also most importantly, as Dr. Lane pointed out, based on what is truly best for student learning. What are the things that we need to frame virtual learning in order to promote the most advantageous learning experience for students if and when they are learning in the virtual realm? So as I said, in a moment, 3 committee members are going to come up and to go over each of these areas. The first one essentially is talking about how we employ staff. I'm sorry, could you go back one? First one is basically how we employ staff, how we onboard them, how staff work with students. It also speaks to the ratio of specific types of staff members to students, etc. The second group talks about instructional time. Dr. Lane was talking about instructional time versus teaching hours. Many of you have become quite familiar with concepts of synchronous and asynchronous. So that group is going to talk about a lot of these issues that school divisions started to ask questions. The last group is going to talk about how we manage students within the human and virtual realm, because these students are students in their locality, as well as having access to certain services that virtual learning programs may not be able to provide, but perhaps schools will. A lot of that needs to be defined. So that group will come back and share their thoughts with you. So moving on, you're going to hear certain phrases today, and it's very important if you've not been speaking this language or in this realm for the last while, you're going to hear some words, and it's important to understand that we're talking about different things when we say different words. First is virtual education. When we talk about that, that is an umbrella that talks about all learning in the virtual realm. Now, there might be some students who are enrolled full-time in a virtual program or school, and they receive all of their instruction at home. At the same time, looking into the future, there will be students who will be able to access more virtual learning opportunities in a hybrid mode. Think about them being, they take 6 classes at their base school, but they take 1 class in from a virtual provider in the afternoon. So that student is part-time. So when we talk about virtual education, it's all of that together. The next item is a virtual course, and a virtual course is that which is provided over the internet. The benefit of that is that students would be able to access learning regardless of where they live. Locality will no longer be a determining factor about whether or not a student can learn a particular course, perhaps. A virtual program is different to a virtual school. I'll come back to a virtual school, but a virtual program essentially would be a program much like a governor's school or any other regional program, in a sense that the students would attend that program for their instruction, but they are still fully enrolled at a base school where all of their records are managed and all of their services are provided. So that takes us to virtual school. Currently, there are no virtual schools in Virginia, but if a school division or even if a region wanted to set up a virtual school, then those students would be enrolled full-time as students of that virtual school, which would mean that that virtual school would then be subject to the same type of standards and accreditation that the school in your own locality would be required to submit to in terms of how specific students doing on the SOLs and all of that level of oversight. Now, a virtual teacher is a teacher of record, and that is the person who is responsible for the overall learning of what is going on in that class. So it's not necessarily just someone sitting far away who's just signed up for a job and they are not endorsed. These are endorsed people who are responsible for the learning of that student, be it for the full program or for a course. Next slide. So as I shared, in a minute here, we're going to move into some presentations from 3 groups. And the first group that will have an opportunity to speak to you, I'm going to introduce Dr. Ashley Ellis from Loudoun County Public Schools. She is Assistant superintendent of instruction there, and she has been a team member of this committee. I am going to hand it over to her at this time so that she can introduce and go through some of the aspects that that group is recommending. Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Brendan. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Brendan mentioned, subgroup 1 was focused on recommendations regarding class size and teacher load and other staffing considerations, as well as equity and student services. We had some great conversations about all of these things and about how the quality of a program in a virtual school should be equal to any brick and mortar instructional program. So the first thing that we looked at was class size and teacher load. It was important to the group members that what happens in the virtual world reflects what happens in the brick and mortar world in terms of the quality of instruction. We want to make sure that the virtual programs are held to the same standards whenever applicable. So you'll see the reference to the Code of Virginia on the left-hand side of this slide as we were thinking about class sizes and teacher load. Our recommendation is that in grades K through 3, classes will be limited to 24 students, and in grades 4 and 5, limited to 25 students. We also had a conversation around situations where a teacher may teach multiple sections of a particular subject. For example, a teacher may teach elementary math and science, and another teacher may teach elementary English and social science. For those situations, the class size average would not exceed 25. Regarding electives, the electives would, the Code of Virginia states that the ratio for specials or electives such as art, music, PE is 1 teacher per 1,000 students. We don't really have enough information yet at this time to know if this needs to be lowered in a virtual learning environment. So at this time, our recommendation would be to keep this the same and gather data as virtual schools are developed. Regarding middle and high school, we lumped these into one category because school divisions sometimes separate these grade levels differently. So taking this as one category, again, going back to the code, the teacher load is a ratio of 150 students to 1, with the exception of English with smaller class sizes. And the group had a great conversation about, while the perception may be that class sizes could be larger in a virtual setting, you don't need physical desks for them or space. The quality of instruction really matters, and the leaders in our group felt strongly that the regulations should also maintain the quality of these programs. So we're recommending that we maintain that ratio in the virtual program as well. Shifting to the next slide, bullet 1, then we address staffing. So looking at the staffing requirements, again, in order to maintain quality and a program just as strong as a brick and mortar school, we thought that it was essential that the teacher of record is a licensed teacher in Virginia and in the area of their endorsement, so to match the brick and mortar requirements. This may not seem like a big deal, but the team felt strongly that this be a requirement. Virtual learning does allow teachers, I think we all saw this during COVID, to more easily bring in content experts to work with their students. And we wanted to make sure that this was possible within the standards. So non-licensed field experts may teach as an adjunct in coordination with the teacher of record. Moving to the second bullet, we elected not to address tech support at the virtual school level because we thought this would be addressed at the division level, but we did talk in depth about the support virtual teachers need, specifically with instructional technology and online instructional strategies. So the role of the instructional technology resource teacher, or the ITRT, is essential for a virtual program. So our recommendation mirrors the current recommended ratios, but we have tied them to teacher numbers rather than student numbers. So it may look a little bit different from what you've seen, but our recommendation is that it would be 1 ITRT to serve 54 educators in each elementary school and 1 per 57 educators in each secondary school. Moving on to bullet 3, professional learning is essential for all teachers. And virtual teachers are no different. Taking that to another level, we did have conversations about professional learning, really focusing on the instructional strategies needed for virtual learning. Virtual teaching looks different. I think all of our teachers and leaders learned that in the past year. And so we would want to make sure that teachers had the support they needed. And moving on to the third slide for group one, a subject very near and dear to my heart. We spent time talking about recommendations for equity and student services. And so virtual programs cannot, should not, will not deny students instruction based on the services that are required to teach them. This may seem like it doesn't need to be said, but it absolutely needs to be said and in writing. So students shall not be excluded from participating in courses provided by virtual programs. We want to make sure whatever program we stand up is equitably accessible to all students. And then with that, the second bullet on the right side really demonstrates the significance of that. And we thought that requiring written documentation to support this compliance was important, particularly as virtual schools are opening up and being developed. So making sure that we can document that no student is being turned away and that students have access to the content in the virtual program. And at this point, Brendan, do you want to pause or move for questions now or move to the next group?
Yeah, let's open it up. If anyone has any questions about class size, teacher load, feel free to raise your hand or to jump to the front of the queue.
No, so this is Ernie. I just, not a question, just kind of a statement that I think that, you know, in a lot of what you expect the teacher to do is going to impact class size. I think they're really closely related. And, you know, just to give two examples, we have classes we offer for first-time takers where we're developing the content ourselves, leveraging applications. They're intended to be rich experiences. And we kind of have a ratio of student to teacher there that works for us. And then we have other circumstances equally legitimate where we're repeating courses or credit recovery scenarios where we're more heavily leveraging courseware. And in those circumstances, the teachers can handle a significantly greater load. You know, expectations for synchronous time and office hours and student to student and student to teacher interaction. You know, like it could be a really broad spectrum of teacher to student ratio based on what you're expecting the teacher and the experience to be like.
Thank you. That is a really good comment that in the group we were addressing the basic classroom setup, but you know, if we talk about credit recovery or anything like that, perhaps we need to be looking at numbers that are slightly different. Thank you. Good feedback. Anyone else for group one?
Rodney Jordan, have a question for the group. As you all were having your discussions and looking at research, couple of things. One, in the area of equity, dealing with students with special learning needs, were you finding that challenges that may exist in the in-person environment, in the brick and mortar environment, just carry over into the virtual environment, or that the virtual environment may be, for lack of a better word right now, better at addressing these concerns? As a school board member, I hear from parents quite a bit. And sometimes I hear that their children have special learning styles or needs that virtual works very well. In other cases, I hear concerns where parents that have children with IEPs feel that the virtual environment may not be meeting the specific needs of the IEP. Similarly, where there have been issues in the brick and mortar environment, where schools may have long-term subs or may not even have licensed or classroom teachers that are meeting the need in terms of the brick and mortar environment, trying to see whether or not that same type of gap or inequity, if you will, may come over into the virtual environment. So I'm just trying to get a feel for any discussions that you had around leveraging the virtual environment with the level of intentionality to actually maybe address some of these inequities that we have seen historically in the brick and mortar environment, and actually seeing the virtual environment as a way of eliminating gaps, or in some instances, your research may be showing that there may need some intentionality because the virtual environment may make some gaps and inequities worse.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I will say that based on the research, what we did see was that based on the level of schooling is that there were states were approaching it in some different ways. If you had a virtual school, which meant that the student is a member of that school, then that school would have to employ a significant level of special education as well as English language learners. I would say that, if I may go back, those are the two areas that we found quite a lot addressed, is English language learners as well as students with learning disabilities. And what they more or less did is, if you think about, as a parent of a child with an IEP, you want to have the most appropriate accommodation for your child, and having a blanket policy that is going to work for everyone, that is written for everyone, is not going to be appropriate for the individual child. And what we found was that when we took a look at several states, they recommended that almost as part of the IEP process, the appropriateness of the virtual learning realm be assessed according to the needs of that individual student. There were some students that might have had certain accommodations needed, which could be efficiently provided for in the virtual realm. And so some states had a requirement that there might be a teacher in the classroom and they could do a breakout room, which is really the same as a teacher going in and doing pull out. And they would do that for both English language learners and students with learning disabilities. There was a lot of that, but I would say that no one has hit the nail on the head, simply because there is no silver bullet. Every single child is going to have a unique need for that. And I foresee that there will be a greater emphasis with our student support services in training them about what is virtual learning and how to help those local teams make those decisions about what is the best mode of learning for that individual child and what accommodations can be provided or are appropriate to be provided. A lot of them were in the gray area of that, primarily because you can't write a blanket statement for all different types of students. So yes, we did see quite a lot, and we do foresee that as the next level of what would need to be addressed.
Dr. Ellis, did you have something to add to that, or?
I was just going to say that our team here in Loudoun has seen what Brendan described play out over the past 18 months. And I think we've noticed that what we know, right? One size does not fit all, that virtual learning was the perfect answer for some students, and some really, really struggled. Even in the best virtual learning classes, they struggled because they needed to be in person. And so thinking about how we would stand up a virtual school, it's really making sure that we have those wraparound services, that the school counseling team, that the IEP team, that the English learner teachers, that everyone is aware of the needs of the student and can work with the family to balance that out to determine if virtual learning is the best fit. So for some students it will be, and for some it absolutely will not be. We've seen that play out over the past several months.
All right, thank you. This has been a very good discussion as we looked at the Group 1's work. We thank you. At this time, we're going to transition, and you'll see how all of these really are linked together as we talk about these strategies and facets of learning in the virtual environment. So I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Patrick from Aurora Institute as part of our work group, who will present on instructional time.
Thank you. Thanks to the Virginia Department of Ed, the school divisions and leadership. This really does represent a collective effort and a collaborative effort. And I'm grateful to be in service with you. So thanks for this opportunity. Our work group did look at policies around instructional time. We also looked at best practices across states, across the US, and really put first and foremost the idea that Dr. Lane brought up earlier, which is to absolutely focus on quality and also understand that we don't want to create some carve out in virtual learning, but we want to be consistent with holding high quality standards for all environments. Certainly the pandemic has made virtual learning a bigger part of what our youth are experiencing. It's really critical in how we look at instructional time. So there are 4 areas: calendar, standard units of credit, the school day and seat time equivalents, as well as attendance. And we'll start here under instructional time with the calendar. In developing this policy framework, it's really important because some virtual education programs do calendar flexibility differently. And so what we're asking for is the shall, that the programs will develop a calendar and post that publicly. The calendar does need to be specific in how students are served by defining those periods, whether it's a semester, a quarter, a school year, grading period. Be really clear about what the length of the term is for students to complete that required coursework. So want to create some flexibility for those programs to be able to develop their calendars, but to be really clear about what their terms are and what the expectations are for students, so you're holding all students to the same expectations. This includes defining the cohort model that the program is using for students. Some programs have flexible start and end dates within their calendar, and so there can be cohorts that start at certain times and end at certain times. As long as this is clearly defined, it's absolutely critical. You can provide that space for innovation while ensuring that you have oversight on the quality of these programs. So that is the big picture on the calendar. Go on to the next one. So the next item is looking at, for instructional time, how do we move away from just using seat time as the proxy for awarding standard units of credit? And again, we will really trying to focus in on referring back to the board's guidelines and quality standards of quality in other areas. So for standard units of credit, division shall establish a local policy for waiving the 140 clock hour requirement for awarding credit. So what is that policy that the division will set that will create the equivalent for awarding credit? We can go to the next slide. So following, for school day and seat time equivalents, the school divisions will establish a policy and the equivalent for seat time. So the seat time equivalent, and we've seen this in a number of other states, may be based on percentage of minutes of instruction. That's a more traditional measure. Also monitoring time logged in. More and more states are turning to looking at the performance on assessments, competency achievement, how students are demonstrating the standards, demonstrating skills, and building that academic knowledge, having evidence of a student performance that highlights that they have met the equivalent for the expectations in that credit. So not just seat time, but what is the evidence of student work or competency attainment that would warrant awarding credit. Next slide. And on attendance, which is in the similar vein, virtual education program or school shall establish methods to track student attendance. This can be students' time on task, completing assignments, turning assignments in, the interaction between students and faculty or teachers, and that teacher of record, and other appropriate means. That the division is being clear about how they are monitoring and tracking attendance. There are also, this has been really critical in some other states, that as you look at capturing how you monitor attendance and setting policies for attendance, that you establish, or the divisions will establish, truancy intervention procedures, ensuring that students are making progress on the standards, competencies, and skill development. So the attendance and the truancy policies go hand in hand. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susan. And we will entertain questions. We thought it would be a good idea to break up these policies as we look at the groups and entertain questions and discussion after each presentation. I think we have the choir sitting here, so time.
I'll go again. Just from the attendance perspective, is it that you're envisioning that each local school division will set their own policy around that, or do you see some policies that will be statewide, if you will, and then others that have local flexibility? Can you speak a little bit more about what your thoughts were around that when it comes to attendance and instructional time?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that question. I also served on that one, Mr. Jordan, and thank you for that question. It's an excellent one. I hope that when you heard the recommendations or read them for the last 4 slides, in the area of attendance especially, what we're trying to do is provide a baseline expectation for all school divisions to make sure that they are taking attendance, they are addressing truancy, but wanted to provide local flexibility for that allows for innovation and to looking at different ways to monitor students and to best meet the needs of that community. So I think trying not to over prescribe, but at the same time holding a good level of accountability in there in making sure that it has to be established. Those recommendations also, especially specifically on the attendance, map back to our work on guiding school divisions, providing for attendance during the pandemic and when they had virtual programs, trying to allow for those different situations where kids might be even learning with packets at that time and coming in to check. So providing as much flexibility as possible was the key there. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the flexibility is important. Also, I would just recommend, to the extent that we can mine attendance data, looking at what actually occurred during the pandemic, what's last year, what's occurring now, just in my own exposure and seeing student attendance at a school level within a school division, or attendance between school divisions. There's a lot of variation there, and again, just speaking from the perspective of what I hear from parents that have children at multiple schools, it becomes very complicated for them trying to understand what the expectation is at one school versus another school, or never mind if they work in one division and have children in another division. And so I do think the local flexibility is important, but if we're able to actually pull from some of the attendance data that hopefully we have available from last year, that may illuminate some things for consideration as we look at the next phase of how much flexibility do we provide and how much standardization do we provide, keying in on your goal of always trying to support as much innovation as possible.
Thank you very much for that.
All right, thank you. We are going to move on to our third group and final group presentation, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Meg Foley.
Thank you, Reggie. Yes, I had the pleasure of working with the data reporting and operational subgroup, and our members included Dr. Mohammed Abdul, Dr. Leslie Hughes, Dr. Brian Mott, and Dr. Karen Richardson. And so Karen has kindly said that she would present our work to date in this area. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, Karen, again.
And thanks so much, Meg, and thank you all. It was a pleasure. I'm using the past tense. I'm not sure if my service has ended or not, but it has been—
Oh, no, ma'am.
Okay.
Still gotcha.
It has been a pleasure to be part of this work so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. I'm honored to be able to share it with you today. I think there are interesting connections being able to go last and not necessarily having seen the other groups, but I think in our case for data reporting and operational, the big theme is to make sure that all the decisions and ideas that were put forth in terms of instruction and staffing and those sorts of things are clearly communicated to families who are considering the virtual school option. And I think that's a theme throughout the slides that you'll see coming here. Whatever decisions are made, we need to tell people that. So we have about 5 or 6 different areas that we'll work through. And the first one is enrollment and matriculation. Policies and procedures need to be put into place in terms of the public virtual school setting for parents prior to enrollment. How do you enroll your student? And then beyond that, those bullet points on the side get a little small there, but this is sort of all the things that a parent and their child would need to know about this particular setting. And none of it is a surprise because it's the same kind of information we share with them about a face-to-face school setting as well. How do you apply? How are you accepted? What kind of information can you expect? All that equity support, students with IEPs, how do we deal with gifted services? What kind of guidance counseling services do we have? So on and so forth. Are there ITRTs who are supporting the teachers? And all those sorts of procedures that we need to think about. They may be different for the virtual setting, and certainly that's a ripe area for conversation, but they need to be in place and they need to be communicated to parents and students prior to enrollment. So everybody's clear on what the expectations are. And we can do the next one. We haven't talked about assessment and testing, so that is an area that was unique to our group, and the next 2 slides kind of cover that in 2 different ways. Clearly, if you are enrolled in a Virginia public school, whether virtual or face-to-face, you will be required to take the applicable assessments, whether they're diagnostic tests, standards of learning tests, screener tests, so on and so forth. We anticipated in this draft language that there needs to be some secure, controlled, and proctored environment, licensed personnel or trained personnel to proctor. You can see from the bullet points on the right, our preference is that even students enrolled in virtual programs, if at all possible, take assessments in a face-to-face environment. That's the best way to ensure it, but there are certainly other ways of doing that, and we've done it. We have folks right now taking exams and they're doing them in those environments, but policies need to be in place and those things need to be communicated to families as well in terms of what the accountability is, what the assessments are going to be. And then the next one pulls out some of the little bulleted language on the last one. And again, this really is the communication piece. And we're not necessarily even suggesting what the policies are, but we're suggesting that these need to be submitted or people need to understand what these are prior. They do need to have annual assessments in place. We use those for all sorts of things for students, remediation, other support structures, opportunities for different kinds of programs. And of course, we're exploring a time, and I think this is the most exciting part of some of this work, is it's our chance to be innovative about what assessments look like as well, and the opportunity to explore both traditional and non-traditional non-traditional assessments as part of the work in a public virtual school setting. This one was sort of a no-brainer. You need to keep records, and they probably should be very similar to the kind of records that we're keeping for other students. Dr. Jordan talked about being able to mine attendance data and those sorts of things. So record keeping needs to be in place. The kinds of student scholastic records that may be necessary to be made available to school boards, superintendents, school board employees, and so on and so forth. And then this was the piece I think Dr. Ellis mentioned, that they didn't mess around too much with technology and support, but obviously in a virtual environment, technology takes on a very large role in a way that it doesn't always. And I'll just say that putting in some requirements for ITRTs is a great idea to make sure that you've got the support for the teachers. We also need to think about support for students and their families as well when they're taking whether they're taking devices home or how they're using those devices and accessing them. So in addition to thinking about how you're going to support them, you also need to have a particular infrastructure in place. It'd be nice to think that you could run a virtual school using a couple of Google sites and some Google Docs, but the fact of the matter is you need a secure system that protects student data. That means a robust learning management system, the kinds of communication tools that allow teachers and students to communicate both synchronously and asynchronously. Lots of opportunities, depending on the kinds of course that you're doing, for access for collaboration, learners and teachers, as well as the other staff that's available through the virtual school. And then that final bullet point, reliable technological support for the stakeholders as part of that system as well. It only takes you a couple times to not be able to log in to get to frustration. And then finally, we included information on the extracurricular activities and in terms of what those eligibility requirements should be. We're recommending in this draft language that they should be established in alignment with the already existing state policy, and that online learning students may participate in the extracurricular activities of their enrolling school division was kind of how we came down. I hope I did a good job, team.
You did wonderfully, Karen. Thank you so much for sharing our work on to date. And so now we'll open it up. If anyone has any questions or comments about the data reporting and operational subgroup.
Meg, this is Ben Kaiser with VEST, and I really do appreciate the work that the subgroups have done. And obviously you've spent time and effort in thinking through some of these critical issues. I wouldn't mind either today or maybe later hearing a little more from all three groups on something that I don't think I heard too much about this afternoon. And if I just didn't hear it, please correct me. But it sounds like what I've heard is that we're trying to establish standards that are pretty comparable to in-person standards, and that we're doing that under the guise of accountability and quality. However, I haven't heard too much about innovation and accommodating students who might would like to accelerate, or I haven't heard too much about measuring success based on student outcomes and what might be able to be accomplished in a shorter time frame using the virtual format. And I know school divisions use virtual, as Rodney, I think, mentioned, for credit recovery and some other unique circumstances. But I guess with that, my question is, maybe are there different populations that might be served best in a virtual environment, and we not restrict, what their needs are? And I hope that makes sense.
I think so, Ben. I think that you've hit on something pretty broad there as you were speaking, and I do think that we in this work have really been tasked with doing a broader look. And maybe perhaps some of what you are speaking to is more of the guidance documents and resources that we hope we already have some that have been created, but would hope to have them accompany this more broader. When you start to think about regulations, it is definitely a broad language area, but those guidance for success is where I think you're heading, where you'll get down and say, all right, school divisions, here's some help on how you can work with innovation and accommodating students. This is what a successful online student would look like. This is how you can help those. And in my mind, that's really where we're coming down to more of the guidance, the implementation stage. So I'll let Michael or Brendan or Reggie, if you want to jump in with that, but I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, Dr. Kaiser, thank you so much for that question. I think it's an absolutely perfect segue into some of these things. And I know that, so I'm going to speak to a couple things from our work group that I really felt like, because we did have that exact conversation. So for instance, when we talked about the calendar and establishing the calendar with the terms, what we were trying to do was have them, so I have to back up just a second. Student information systems are built on an annual calendar, right? And so typically there has to be some sort of rollover from year to year. That is really one of the pieces that is very difficult for schools that are trying to innovate and have kids jump from one year to the next in one course through acceleration. What we were trying to define were the ways, so for instance, with the terms, that was going to be the max length of time in which a student was expected to finish coursework. However, by establishing a requirement that the school division that's running the school or program have a policy for waiving the 140 clock hour requirement, we wanted them to be able to base it on competency and move kids and award credit prior to the end of the term, and so that they could move forward to the next course. Now, the 2013 proposed regulations actually said that if a kid enters a course and completes it early, then they had to be enrolled right away in the next course. And that was one thing that we wanted to pull away from to prescribe that, because we don't know if, for instance, they were accelerating in one area to make room for another, or if it needed to be in the same academic area. We wanted to keep that door a little bit wide open. So I think we had hoped, at least in our group, talking about the calendar and the requirement for the alternative way to award standard credit. That was one of the ways that we were hoping to foster innovation, especially for kids that are accelerated in nature.
If I could jump in just with a supporting thought about innovation, and Dr. Kaiser, I love that you went there. Something that is, as smart as we think that we are at the DOE, or even with our people who work with us, we absolutely love and support innovation. And in fact, I can think of two programs. The one is School Divisions of Innovation, and the other one is K-12 Schools of Innovation, where we actually provide some funds for schools to try some innovative things. I would definitely foresee at some point in the future, school divisions or schools are going to take a look at this whole new tool of virtual learning, and to be able to think about, well, how can we leverage virtual learning in order to support things that you were talking about, things like acceleration, or trying to provide ways for students who will excel in the virtual learning space, so that they can modify and they can use this as a whole new tool in order to innovate. So the Department of Education has these other mechanisms that the virtual learning regulations will provide for a way for a whole lot of innovation. It's a whole new tool in the box that we will absolutely support.
Excellent. Thank you for that discussion. And we want to have an opportunity for everyone to participate. just as Ben has shared already with looking outside of the box. So Brendan, we'll let you continue.
Sure, I'll mostly just introduce the forum. As I said before, our moms might think we're smart, but we don't think that we are the sage of all. And as we've taken a look at all of the other states and other regulations, and we came up with those 3 buckets, we are quite aware that the knowledge base has grown in the virtual learning space over the years, and people might have even more ideas of that which we have covered today. And we're already aware of some of the things. For example, how might funding follow students who are full-time virtual students? We haven't addressed that today, but that is something that we may still take a look at. Taking a look at specialized training. I know in my group, we spoke a lot about professional development or even requiring specific training for the virtual space. How could we do that in a virtual way? In other words, something like micro-credentials. We didn't really go too deep into that. As well as virtual teacher evaluation. You know, if a teacher is out there teaching virtually, how can we assure, as Dr. Lane wanted, that there is deeper learning, that there is quality instruction carrying on? We haven't really gone there today, but we're aware that these are things that we may want to go to. So in essence, what we wanted to do was wanted to take a little step back, and we wanted to open the floor to you and to ask, what are things that you might think that we should take a look at in addressing virtual learning regulations in Virginia to assure quality, equitable learning experience for all students. So we're going to take a step back and open it up for suggestions.
Hi, Brendan. How are you? I have a question as far as if there's something different, but how this fits into blended learning. And I keep thinking about seat time, clock hours, and how you can really create a flexible schedule in a high school because you're blending learning. And you may not need 90 minutes in a social studies class because you're just really an hour with your teacher and you're using your time just a little bit differently. Is that something we're going to address here in virtual learning, or is that something that will be separate?
I will let Meg or Reggie take it further than my initial introduction. When I think of blended learning, I think that there are different scales of blended learning. We could have a situation where some teachers have a flipped classroom, or they are using students doing a lot of online stuff outside of class or in class. That's one level of blended learning, but you already took it to the next level, which we have seen some places do, where students might be a portion of the block, they might be in the class with the teacher, and then another portion of the block, they might have students going out and working in groups in another space in the school. That is definitely something that we probably should take a look of. In that situation, there is an in-person aspect of the students are still in the building, and all of the other in loco parentis types of things would still need to be in place. That's absolutely something that we possibly might need to explore. Meg or Reg or Michael, do you have thoughts to add?
Tina, thank you for your question. I mean, as you know, at Code RVA, when I opened up that school, it was modeled as a blended learning school. And we actually did it through a high school innovation grant at the time, which Dr. Alvin mentioned earlier. And we did learn a lot from that blended learning experience. As a matter of fact, they were the only school in March of 2020 that didn't shut down when it came to learning, at least not initially. So I will say that these regulations that we're aiming towards, that we open up the door for, are for virtual programs and schools. And so I think it's really targeted. Now, how do you, but I don't think that it's, in the way that we've written this now, we have not addressed blended learning, no. I think that would have to come within discussions about how to fulfill the instructional hour requirement, and then these discussions about unscheduled learning, remote learning days, and some of those related discussions. But that really comes down to the statutory requirement for the instructional time and what's the role of both in-person and the virtual. But these regulations are focused squarely on virtual programs in schools.
All right, thank you. Is there other discussion, other regulations, other considerations that we should look at when this work group gets back together?
Actually, I gotta ask just for a moment. We've done a great job, I think, of outlining a lot of the parameters of quality education in a virtual setting. What about the considerations of the content that's actually being used? What are those measures of quality? Would we establish, or would we look to others that exist for the actual content that is being taught or learned or explored?
All right. I'm just also noting all of the feedback that we're getting. I don't think that we've addressed the quality and the expectations and the accountability. We haven't specifically addressed what the content should be. And we'll have to depend on our policy folks to see how deep we go, as Michael started out by talking about what constitutes a regulation and what constitutes guidance for school divisions. And those could be two different documents, and those regulations exist in one place, and a guidance document would be published through the Virginia Department of Ed. So we will certainly note that as a consideration and how we take an approach to that.
If I could throw something in here with that, we sort of alluded to it when we were going through the glossary earlier on the vocabulary, and we were talking about what a virtual course is. A huge benefit of being a student who is still an in-person student, but is able to register to take an online course, is I might be living in a certain county somewhere in the Commonwealth, and I might have a specific interest in a specific content area, a specific course that my high school does not have a teacher with that specific endorsement. And one of the huge benefits of the virtual learning platform and being able to be an in-person student but registering for a virtual course is that there is almost no course that would be out of reach for me, because now I'm able to access more content across the entire Commonwealth. And if you think about that, it's going to allow us to have more students specialize, focus, and accelerate and go into the areas that they are gifted, or they have a strength, or they have a passion in. But the second thing that it does is it's an equity issue. It opens up more content to more students across the entire Commonwealth, even if they are an in-person student, but they register for an online course. That is one of the huge benefits that I don't think we need regulations. I think building the framework allows for that to happen. Building the regulations allows for that to happen.
Well, the other, Brendan, part of that is as we try to build this framework or establish standards for virtual, we're early on in this process in many ways, and we certainly don't want to establish language now that boxes school divisions in and restricts innovation and some creative ways to serve students. And the other piece of this is, as you may have been alluding, the money trail is still tied to pretty standard metrics, if you will. And so at some point, as we become a bit more creative in the delivery of services and providing educational opportunities for children, school divisions are going to need to be able to report those children who live in their jurisdictions and ensure that creating an innovative virtual platform is not going to adversely affect them financially. And I know that's not the role of this group and is out of our control in many ways, but that's certainly a piece of this out there. But I have just one other thought, and again, because I don't want us to box superintendents and school boards in with how they serve children. To me, there are still an awful lot of variables out there that need to be locally controlled and not necessarily directed by state framework that, again, restricts them. And maybe that, as Brendan mentioned, maybe that's through the schools of innovation, but there needs to be a clear opportunity for school divisions to innovate pretty freely in the area of virtual delivery, and at the same time measure the success of that going forward. And I know that still is pretty general, but just a few thoughts.
Ben, thank you for your comments, and they're right on target, of course, and I really do appreciate them. I will tell you that there is some work on developing some alternatives around the 180/990 requirement that we've been talking about internally to allow for some avenues for differentiated modalities. But that would have to happen certainly after the August 22 sunset of SB 1303. And so future discussions will be coming in that area because once that sunsets, and by the way, for those of you that don't know, the SB 1303 is the in-person requirement for the current school year. And so once that comes to an end, there will be somewhat of a void that needs to be filled with some guidance. And so we're working on that area now.
Thank you. Thank you to all. Additional discussion before we bring this to a close?
Yeah, just an additional area, and I don't think my comments fit within a regulations area, so to speak, but as I've looked at some research around virtual schools, be they public or private, some data shows that minority students and low-income students enrollment in those schools tends to lag. And to the extent that whether it's this advisory group or if there's another group that can work in parallel with this to try to see that we bake in from the very beginning inclusive strategies in our content, in our delivery, in our policies, in the entire framework of everything that we're doing, that we are truly trying to maximize the inclusive opportunity for all children and all families to be able to participate and engage in this innovation that I think we all agree is just going to grow and explode. And so I just think that's something that I don't want us to lose sight of. It's been a lot of work in the brick and mortar world around cultural competency and inclusion and so forth. I think we need to make sure we carry those themes and beliefs in that work into the virtual learning environment. But if there is a place in this work group or in this advisory council for a group that gives some focus there, or if there's some other place where that should occur, I just encourage us to try to make sure that we are doing that along the way.
Absolutely, and I think that's closely related to the equity portion of our group work that we have. All right, I'd like to bring up the timeline just so you understand the work of the committee, and Michael Bowling alluded to the work that we had to start this group and the work as we continued through the summer months. Now here we are, September, making this presentation to the Virtual Learning Advisory Committee, and we will continue our work in the fall. We do have to report to the Board of Education in January, and we will propose at this time by about March that we have a first reading of the regulations to present. So that is our timeline at this point. There are other things that could impact our work and our presentation as we develop over time. So did you have any additional thoughts, comments, either Michael or Brendan, on this?
No, not on this particularly, Reggie, but I did want to just a couple of last concluding comments, if you don't mind. I know that we're wrapping up. We've got a couple minutes left, but first and foremost, I want to say thank you all so much for your time. Thank you so much for your advice. Thank you for your leadership in this area. Thank you for your oversight and for your feedback. And so please, as you're processing what you've seen, please feel free to send us your thoughts in writing, via email. You can send it to any one of us or all of us, and we certainly will bring that back to our work groups and work through those things. I did want to take just a minute to say we've been talking about virtual learning this whole time. I do want to say that I want a little kudos to Brian Mott at Virtual Virginia for his work with expanding the services of Virtual Virginia. I'm not sure if many of you all are aware, but I know that you're aware that we've expanded services, but I'm not sure to what extent, if you know the extent to which we have expanded services. And so just as a little snippet, last year we had 924 full-time students in Virtual Virginia. This year, so far, we have over 12,600. So that is tremendous growth to all areas of the Commonwealth. And in addition, that turns into a lot of teachers, of course. And by the way, the bulk of our kids are still, it's about 8,000 of those are in 6-12 and about 4,200 are in K-5. And we are looking at, and then the number of teachers, we've expanded by over 300, the number of teachers being served by students in Virtual Virginia over a very short period of time. So hats off to you, Brian, and the work of all your staff at Virtual Virginia and all your teachers to serve all the kids in the Commonwealth. Much appreciated. And again, I want to thank everybody so much for your time today.
Thank you, Brendan.
If I may just echo that, thank you everyone for being here today. This has been a very important hour for us to be able to share our thoughts, gather thoughts, but I specifically would like to extend thanks to Meg and Reggie just for their tireless work of putting all of this together, being the background, being the framework, being the nexus of this. They truly do think in the future as well as looking at what's on the ground, and I truly applaud them. But also want to go ahead and extend thanks to those of you who are working on the subgroups. There've been a lot of meetings that you've given outside of your regular responsibility time. It has genuinely been beneficial for us as we are trying to get toward closing a circle. So just from me, thank you to everyone for your contributions.
Thank you so much. Meg?
Yeah, just want to echo once again, thanks so much. Thank you, special presenters, for presenting that work today. That's always a little bit of a nerve-wracking position to be in. You all did an excellent job sharing everything. Thank you for the wonderful discourse. We appreciate your comments tremendously, your input, and we're looking forward to our continued work surrounding virtual education.
Thank you so much to the entire team and to all of you. And I did receive a couple of questions about, was the presentation going to be shared? So we will be sharing this presentation with the entire group. It will be posted on the division, on the virtual, the Virginia Department of Ed's website. There will be minutes placed there as well, so that we capture all of the discussion, as well as the public will be able to comment until October 8th at our virtual learning post that we have published. So again, thank you. And I'll put this up again. Our next meeting for the work group, the virtual education work group, will continue in October and in the way of subgroups. So those of us who are facilitating those groups will communicate that information. And then the next meeting of our Virtual Learning Advisory Committee, VLAC, will be in the spring. As you recognize, we have 2 major meetings each year, one in the fall and one in the spring. So we will be contacting you and communicating that information as well. Again, thank you all for attending today. And if there is no other discussion, we will end this live stream and end the meeting. Have a wonderful rest of the school year.
Thank you. And thank you, Kevin Foster, for helping with the live streaming. We should have said that, Reg.
Thank you.
Thank you,
all of
Kevin.
our VDOE staff. Yes.